Hello everyone, I'm Delta and welcome to part 1 of my build tutorial series for NerdForge Designs Halo Reach ODST helmet. In this series, I'll be taking you through all of my steps for creating a finished helmet prop that can be used for Halo cosplay or as an office decoration, like this helmet turned into. Make sure you watch until the end of the series where I'll go over what my next project and build tutorial will be. In part 1, I'll go over the processes for cleaning up the raw print, filling in the print lines, sanding the helmet, and finally priming it for paint. Now, on to what you'll need for this part of the tutorial. First, you'll need a printed helmet, sandpaper in a variety of grits. I'll be using 220, 800, and 2000 grit sandpaper, spot putty or some sort of body filler, and finally 2-in-1 automotive filler primer. To start, we'll need to have a printed helmet. You can either buy this from a maker or print your own. I do not recommend printing full helmets in one go if you are a novice to 3D printing. I highly recommend splitting helmets into at least 2 pieces for printing and just joining them together even if you have the bed size to complete it in one go. This helmet took 9 days and around 900 grams of filament on the successful print. I had 2 failures around 3 days and 1 failure at 4 days. In total, it ended up taking almost 3 weeks to get a successful print. Now that you have either bought or printed and assembled your helmet, we can begin cleaning up the print. If you bought your helmet, this step should be mostly completed. Even so, I'd still recommend sanding the helmet to at least 150 to 220 grit just to make sure it's mostly ready for filler. I'll start removing all the supports from the print and we'll begin. As I'm removing the supports for the print, I may use cutting pliers to clip off supports that don't tear off so easily. Once the supports are removed from the print, it's time to start sanding. I use a peaks and valleys method to level and hide my print lines. To do this, I sand down the peaks of the raw print, then fill in the valleys with spot putty and filler primer. I sand raw prints with 100 grit, being careful not to break through the skin and show the infill underneath. I also print at a lower layer height to make this process less labor intensive. Once the raw print is cleaned up, it's time to fill in what's left of the print lines. During these finishing processes, make sure to wear proper personal protective equipment and work in a well-ventilated area at all times. While using spot putty and spray paint, I will be using a respirator with proper filter cartridges and gloves at all times. I'll start spreading spot putty over a majority of the helmet, making sure to avoid detail lines so I don't have to clean them up later. After the spot putty is dried, I will begin sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. Once the whole helmet is sanded, I will make sure to wipe off any excess spot putty dust. Check and see if you have any spots that still show print lines, and if so, apply more spot putty until you get to a point you feel is to your liking. This method will also leave pits and scratches from the air bubbles in the spot putty. I like to leave these in because of the detail it adds, but once again, you can fill and sand these to get a smoother finish. Now that we are done concealing print lines and blemishes, we'll move on to filler primer and doing our final sanding. Before we begin with priming, make absolutely sure there isn't any remaining spot putty dust left on the helmet. This dust could lead to bad adhesion of the primer, causing poor quality or even chipping later on. Start by spraying on a light coat of primer and allowing a few minutes to dry. Now begin spraying several medium coats, making sure to wait a few minutes in between each coat. I recommend at least 2 or 3 medium coats before allowing a few hours to dry completely. Once the primer is dried, it's time for wet sanding. This type of sanding is optional, though I do get a smooth metal-like finish from it. Although if you don't plan on wet sanding, I highly recommend sanding to at least 400 grit before painting. For wet sanding, you can use either a sink or a bucket filled with water. I would typically dunk the part I'm sanding into the bucket, but with a helmet that just isn't going to happen. Begin by dipping a square of 800 grit sandpaper into the water and start lightly sanding the helmet in a figure 8 or circular motion. While sanding, I recommend feeling the smoothness of the part to make sure that you aren't missing any spots. Make sure every once in a while to wet your sandpaper again as well. Once we've finished sanding at 800 grit, we'll move on to 2000 grit to finish sanding on this helmet. Now that the helmet has been completely sanded to 2000 grit, rinse it off with water, making sure to rinse off any of the dust left on it from the sanding process. Allow the helmet to fully dry before painting. I would recommend allowing it to dry overnight. And with that, your helmet is ready for paint and this part of the build tutorial is complete. Join me in the next part for learning how to paint tape off for additional accent colors, and finally weathering. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed this part of the tutorial, and finally subscribe if you want to know as soon as the next part of this tutorial comes out. Until next time, have a great day, happy building, and I hope to see you here next week for part 2 of my Halo Reach ODST helmet tutorial.